long before 1945. In fact, long before the meeting in San Francisco, where 49 Rotarians gathered to help establish the United Nations and the Charter of the UN, it started by a single Rotarian in Nashville, Tennessee, who came up with the idea of International Institutes of Understanding. And they spread across the USA. They went to Dallas, they went to Houston, Texas, and all around the world. They put Rotary on the map for international understanding and world peace initiatives. So when President Roosevelt from the US and Winston Churchill from United Kingdom had their discussions about the idea of forming something called the United Nations, they realized that they had to get Rotary involved at the table, because essentially we were doing what they had hoped Rotarians may eventually help them do what the United Nations was going to do. So that is a little bit of the background, which happened in the 30s, well before the 1945 meeting. And Rotary was well before the 1945 meetings. Rotary solicited input from clubs and districts around the world. And in fact, there was a conference at a location called Dumbarton Oaks. And there was a document published as a result of those meetings where they gathered input to prepare them to go to the meeting in San Francisco in 1945, well prepared to give input that was gathered across the Rotary world. And then following the meeting where the UN was chartered in 1945, we produced a second document, which was called From Here On, which it contained information on the charter, as well as notations of the Rotarians who were there in terms of the aspect of what the UN could do and what we could do to support it. And From Here On was essentially something that the Rotarians used to give them some marching orders and to motivate them to do great things. I should mention that it was a Rotarian from South Africa who actually wrote the first draft of the UN Charter, and it was 3 Rotarians who helped negotiate the land deal for the UN headquarters in New York City. And so we have deep roots at the United Nations. And when you go to the UN and you meet with the senior leaders there, they acknowledge us as having the highest level of official status at the UN. They talk to us in terms of having a partnership, relationship. They feel that we're the leading NGO at the UN, and they are impressed by our action. They see what we've done in polio, and they're really impressed with how we get traction and make things happen and make the rubber hit the road. In fact, they say, we need to listen to you because you've proven that you can do things. They cite our polio efforts. They know that we were able to declare a non-war zone to go in for a day and eradicate polio. They know that for a weekend, we worked with the Tamil Tigers to declare a peace zone while we could go in on a weekend and inoculate the children in polio. And by the way, one of the interesting negotiation points was we had to agree to inoculate the Tamil Tiger children as part of that ceasefire. And so the UN officials say to us, please, please, you've negotiated a ceasefire for a day. You've negotiated a ceasefire for a weekend. You guys know how to do it. Please help us negotiate a ceasefire for a week. And then please help us negotiate a ceasefire for a month and then a year, because we need to listen to you. You know how to make the rubber hit the road. So you can take great pride in knowing that the senior leadership of the United Nations really does hold their hat off to Rotary. What more do they wish we could do in Rotary? Well, they hope that we'll continue to create public awareness about global issues. They're hoping that we can strengthen and scale up our already successful programs for Rotary. And they want us to build more capacity with our literacy and education. It's important to them that we help promote literacy, which is the pathway from poverty. And of course, they hope that we will continue with our exchange programs to promote tolerance and respect around the world, as we do with many of our youth exchange programs and our group study exchange, VTT programs, our teachers exchange programs, and all of those things that help improve world understanding. And most importantly, they're hoping that we can each demand more accountability from our government officials, because too many times our premiers, our prime ministers, our heads of state come out of meetings, they stand in front of the TV cameras and they say the things that they think the TV people want to hear, but then they go home and they do not walk the talk in terms of delivering what was agreed to at the meetings. And it's kind of discouraging that certainly in Canada and the US, we're not delivering to the international stage what we've agreed to in terms of international development resources and support around the world. So they say, please hold your government officials more accountable and get all of your friends and neighbors and Rotary members as constituents in each of their countries to hold their service providers and governments more accountable. When we look at the Rotary's areas of focus, the 6 areas of focus, they're almost the same concept and same meaning as the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And really, when you think about it, why wouldn't they be similar when a Rotarian wrote the first charter of the UN? So the meanings of Rotary's goals and objectives, the meanings taken from the charter of the UN are almost the same when it comes to their meaning. So what can we do in Rotary to help make sure that the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are worked on and are successful towards making the world a better place? Well, at the international level, our senior leaders are working with all of the affiliate NGOs of the United Nations to promote world peace and harmony and focus on the 6 areas that I just mentioned. And at the international level, our senior leaders are trying to build relationships with all of these affiliate action groups from the United Nations. More locally, you can get involved at your club and your district level. One big one is the Model United Nations Assemblies, where we work with schools, high schools, colleges, universities to have, they're kind of like a high-level debate, and they debate issues that are on the tables at the United Nations. Students are assigned different countries and they come and debate the issues. In fact, some of them actually dress in the costumes of the countries they're representing to add some realistic characterisms to the event. So you can support Model United Nations groups in your local communities and across your districts. Of course, we have Rotary Foundation projects that all focus on helping reach the sustainable goals. You can network with the local affiliate groups. And there's an organization that's called WFUNA, World Federation of United Nations Associations. We've got the Canadian Association that I'm affiliated with. We've got one in United Nations of Australia Association. And these associations have local chapters. I'm guessing that there's one in the area where you reside, so people can get involved in those local associations working with the United Nations. Rotary exchange programs, as I mentioned, are very popular, and also some of the other items that we have there, and it's just amazing what we can do. So you have a Rotary toolbox that can help make a difference in our troubled world in partnership with the United Nations. We've got our scholarships that send people around the world. Of course, our Peace Scholarship is one of the largest ones plus our ambassadorial scholarship. As I mentioned, we've got our Rotary Foundation programs. Use your Rotary network, and our exchange programs are also an important part of that. And on Facebook, for those of you who might be on Facebook, there's a group called United Nations Rotary Friends. So you can get on there with Rotary friends from around the world who have an interest in United Nations and share discussions and information there. And of course, the big one is the matching global grants. And one of your members reported on one that you're doing. Great to see you involved in that. So you're obviously involved in those and you know a bit about them. But let's just take a look at matching grants and how they work, because they are really something that makes us do great work in the community. Now, if I were there in person, I would call some people up on the stage and do some magic tricks to match the district DDF to your club funds, and then we would match the combination of those two amounts to your Rotary Foundation grant in Evanston. But because I can't be in front of you in person, I'm just going to play a short 3-minute video to show you really how simple the matching grants can be. So it's important to realize that whatever Rotary does depends on the financial support of Rotarians and friends and their personal contributions, Rotary Club fundraising projects and in some cases district fundraisers. So let's all remember that where the rubber really hits the road is when we raise money for our foundation to do the great work and the matching grants and all the exchange programs. So my friends, you are the power of one. You have the opportunity as an ordinary person to do extraordinary things through the leverage of your Rotary Club. And so I hope that this shares with you a little bit about why you have such high level of respect and why the roots are running so deep with the Rotary and the United Nations partnership. 75 years ago, 49 of your fellow Rotary friends sat in San Francisco and helped design the blueprint for what we now know as the United Nations. And so you can take great pride in knowing that your organization continues to do great work and support this great institution trying to make our troubled world a better place. Thank you.
Thanks. Can I
Thanks,
ask a question, John, right before we get into questions? This technical one. Doug, some of us were having trouble with the video. Do you have a link to that video you could send us so we could append that to our weekly bulletin?
Yes, you can. In fact, you can likely just copy that out of the PowerPoint presentation I gave you as a backup. So just to explain, did it not come through loud enough or it was just lagging?
Bit of both.
Okay. So essentially what I did was I took $5 from the lady, which represented a club donation, and I, through the magic trick in the bag, doubled that to make it two $5 bills representing the DDF match. And then the second gentleman, I took $10 from him, and through my magic printing press, I turned it from a $10 bill into a $20 bill to get the additional match from the Rotary Foundation in Evanston. So, you know, the point is, where can you get a 3.5, 4 times bang for your buck in terms of return on investment? There's no other foundation that I know of that you can put $1 in and take almost 4 times dollars back out, and you get to know where the money was spent. And in most cases, you can even go and watch where the money got spent.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. That was fascinating. I was particularly interested in that history of Rotary's involvement in the founding of the UN and the ongoing involvement and Rotary's status with very high status in the UN. We've got quite a bit of time, plenty of time for questions. So can we have any questions, please?
One more point of order before, Doug, would you mind unsharing your screen?
Oh, yes.
Perfect. There are a few questions there. Tony? Tony and Jenny both have questions.
I'm happy to ask. Doug, so your role at the UN, what do you actually do when you're connected with it? Are you actually attending meetings there or committee meetings, or what do you actually do?
Okay, so there are 17 RI reps around the world. There's Rotary representation at every facility in the world where UN has a presence. So we have 3 Rotarians who live in the area of New York City who are responsible to go to the weekly meetings. They're responsible to take into the United Nations the thoughts and the ideals of Rotary. They're expected to bring out of the United Nations issues and concerns, and they are to share those with the senior leadership of Rotary. My role is more as a floater because I work from home, and I'm usually the guy that gets asked to go and speak at Rotary conferences or Zone Institutes or monitor humanitarian aid projects. So I'm only in New York maybe 3-4 times a year for more special events or meetings. But the idea is to maintain and build the relationships at the United Nations. We have an opportunity usually once a year. It's usually the first week of November, where we have a Rotary Day at the UN, we call it. And Rotarians can go there for a day. And we have sessions partially with senior Rotary leaders, partially with senior United Nations leaders. And that's usually held on a Saturday. And then I help coordinate a day for the Canadian groups in conjunction with the Canadian ambassador. And that's held on usually the Friday. So it's a matter of trying to work to build awareness of the Rotary UN partnership. That's partly my role. Also to try and leverage the public awareness of Rotary in a community by sharing with the media, sharing with Rotarians, sharing with anybody who will listen that Rotary can elevate their status in their community merely by doing a better job of promoting the relationship that we have with the UN and the roots that we have right from the very start. And so a lot of cases, it's in my role is more building public awareness, trying to get some media coverage to elevate the status of Rotary.
Thanks, Doug. I think Robin had a question. Is that right, Robin? If you want to unmute. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, John. Yes. I think we had a Rotarian from our area, Stephanie Woolard. She went to the UN, the Rotary Day at the UN a few years ago, didn't she, Mark? And I believe there was some award that she received. I believe one of our club members also, June Anderson, has a local role with the UN, and in fact she went over to New York a year or two ago as a multicultural representative. So that's exciting, and maybe that would be a good idea for the club to hear more from June about that participation with UN. But thank you, Doug, for your sharing.
Okay.
Bruce, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, Doug, and thank you for your talk. In light of the present world crisis, what is the connection between the United Nations and the World Health Organization? Maybe you can just help us understand if there's a connection there.
Yes, the screen I showed, I call them United Nations affiliates, like UNESCO, by the way, is another group that started at a Rotary conference in United Kingdom years ago. That's where the seed for UNESCO came from. World Health is also an affiliate group. It comes under the United Nations umbrella, and it kind of functions as a standalone group, but it is under the umbrella of the United Nations.
Mm. And what can Rotary do you think, to help the WHO help us tackle this crisis that's occurring, not just a health crisis, but an economic crisis around the world?
Well, we're already very deep into the work with the WHO because, as I'm sure you know, we're partners with them in the polio eradication effort. So what we have done is we have given them our total polio resources. We've got over, I don't quote me on the number, but somewhere in the range of 20,000 Rotarian volunteers and polio staff who are working to assist WHO and the other health agencies. We have, I believe, 7 laboratories that work on polio initiatives and testing. They are now temporarily reassigned to help with the with the COVID testing. And as we did with Ebola, a lot of our resources and technology and the experiences we learned with our polio work was very helpful to fight Ebola, and now it's as equally helpful in fighting COVID. We've even, the vehicles and the two-way radios and the satellite phones, all of those assets that we have in our polio eradication efforts are temporarily being loaned to the health organizations and WHO to try and assist in the COVID fight. So Rotary is in full tilt with WHO trying to fight this COVID thing.
Thanks, Doug. Well done.
Okay.
Brian McPhail, did you have a question? If you can unmute. If you can unmute, Brian. You need to unmute. That's it.
Sorry. Yeah, no, mine was the same question as Bruce. I was just interested to know about the COVID operations around the world. So thank you for the answer.
So I can add on to that actually, because I just was on a Rotary call with some of the Rotary Foundation trustees this morning. And so that there's 3 areas where there's substantial funds going out to districts and clubs. One, of course, is the district grants, where clubs can apply for matching amounts of money, depending on their local district budgets, of course, to get matching grants at the district level for COVID projects that they want to do locally. There's also the global grants that are getting fast-tracked. Any global grants that you want to propose for COVID work are getting fast-tracked. And the third avenue is the disaster relief grants. That's a special category of grant now that's set up by the Rotary Foundation trustees. And just within the last, I'm going to say 10 days, the trustees authorized $3 million to be put into that disaster relief fund. And clubs can submit grant applications to apply for matching funds again to fight COVID projects. So Rotary is really putting all the horsepower they can towards this issue.
Are there any particular examples of what clubs at a club level are doing in that regard?
Well, some of the biggest ones are supplying PPE equipment, masks, and protective gowns or protective wear. The Philippines are making, they're kind of like well, they call them bunny suits, because they're kind of like coveralls with feet and mitts. And when you see somebody wearing one without the ears, they look like a bunny. So they've got a nickname of bunny suits. And I know the Rotarians in the Philippines have just, was on with them yesterday, and they just celebrated their 10,000th donation of these bunny suits to the frontline healthcare workers. There's Rotarians who have 3D printing technology, and so they're printing up the head brackets to hold the clear face shields so they're making face shields. They're 3D printing the harness part that fits on your head, and then they're using clear plastic to attach to them for the shields. There's other Rotarians who are donating food. There's one I talked to yesterday in a session I was doing, and what they're doing is they've gone to the local school, and the principal there knows who the poor families are in the community. So he invites the poor families to the resource center at the school, and then the Rotarians are there and they hand out bags of groceries to the poor families. And that's how they're controlling so that people don't come and get greedy in a public forum. And so the poor families are identified, and then they're invited. So those are some that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. Mark Bella.
Yes, just a quick one for you, Doug. So aside from Rotary, are there any other non-nations that have a seat, a permanent seat at the UN?
There are over 2,500, I'm going to say, NGOs that have NGO status at the UN at various levels. One like Red Cross is one, and there are some others. What I didn't have time to get into is that there are several subsections of the United Nations, and Rotary is attached to the arm of the UN called ESOC, which is the Economic and Social Council, which deals mostly with economic development, disease, poverty, and that sort of thing. Another one would be the peacekeeping missions, and that's another appendage of the UN. Another one would be the liaison with Interpol. And so there are several different sections of the United Nations. So there's different NGOs that would be attached depending on what area of expertise they have. But because we're related to the humanitarian movement, we're attached to what we call the ESOC division. And by the way, I sometimes get asked, why doesn't the UN do more? And there's 2 or 3 reasons for that. Number one, the United Nations is nothing more than a trade association of countries. And the Secretary General, he's only like an executive director of a trade association, and he can only do what the members instruct him to do. And the United Nations can only do what the membership all agree to do. And a lot of the power is in the hands of the Security Council, because unless the UN Security Council passes a resolution, or unless a country invites the UN in to help with a specific problem, the UN really doesn't have a lot of teeth to do enforcement. It's the same with Interpol. I'm involved a little bit with policing, and I'm a federal police advisor. So I've worked with the Interpol folks a bit in New York at the UN, and even Interpol doesn't have any authority unless they are given that authority by a UN Security Council resolution, or unless they're invited by some specific country's law enforcement agency to come in because they need help. So the UN sometimes has its hands tied, and it's based on the Security Council, and that's where the authority comes from. The second part is that a lot of times there's more goes on at the United Nations in the cafeteria at lunchtime than there is in the actual sessions, because there's no newspapers, there's no media cameras in the cafeteria. So a lot of time the real work of the United Nations gets done in the cafeteria at lunch, but then that doesn't ever get recorded. So there's no credit given to the UN for the results. And I've been to meetings with some of these ambassadors, are friends of mine, and I remember being at an event where there was 3 or 4 ambassadors chatting at a reception, and there was a Latin American ambassador who was being really hard to deal with during the meetings that day. And at this reception, 2 or 3 of the other ambassadors that I was with were giving this guy the gears, asking him why he was being so difficult to deal with. And they said, like, you know that we're right, our point is valid, why are you being so difficult over this issue? And he said, well, he said, he says, I agree that you're right. And he says, you'll likely get your own way, but he says, you got to be patient for 2 or 3 days, because my people in my country have to see me doing my job. So it's kind of like our parliament.
Thanks, Doug. Any more questions from participants before we hand over to our President Gay? No, I don't think so. I'll hand back to Gay.
Thank you very much, Doug. That was really interesting. I found it fascinating. Having been in Rotary now for 5 6 years, it's really interesting to hear it from a global perspective. So that was really nice to hear. What I'd like to do as a way of thank you is we will send you a certificate, and we will make a donation on your behalf to one of our signature projects, which is Operation Cleft. Now, in Operation Cleft, we sponsor operations for children in Bangladesh who have cleft lip and cleft palate, and we've done many 13,000 operations for these children over the years. So it's a really important project for us, and we will make a donation in your name to that charity as a way of thank you. And as I said, we will send you a certificate as well.
Oh, that's very kind. And I don't know if someone put a bug in your ear or not, but the cleft palate surgeries are very appropriate because my wife is a dentist and a maxillofacial surgeon, and she's been volunteering with cleft palate surgeries now ever since she graduated from university. So she's very excited to know anything about cleft palate support.
Well, we didn't know that, but that's very appropriate by the sounds of things.
Yes.
Thank you again. Amanda, I saw you come in, and it's nice to see you here too. So welcome. I'm glad to see you were able to come. A few things just to wind up. On the 29th of April, we're going to trial breakout rooms as part of our meeting. And Mark's been working on this, and we thought it'd be, we don't have a guest speaker. We have 3 5-minute speakers that day. So the A team's coming along, and they're going to talk about themselves. But in addition to that, we thought it was a good opportunity to trial breakout rooms, and which, if it works, what we'll do is incorporate the breakout rooms as part of our meetings on a regular basis. But as I said, we're just trialing things to start off with. We'll see how things work, and then if they work well, then we'll implement them on a regular basis. And next week, Chair is Owen. So Owen, we'll see you next week as Chair. I'll send you a running sheet during the week. And our guest speaker will be Daryl Moran, who you know is incoming, District Governor nominee. And he's going to be talking about his book, Empire's Son. So that's coming up next week. And I would just like to wish you all the very best for the week. Please stay safe. We'll leave the line open for a while if you would wish to have a chat with some of the people here. By all means, feel free to do that. I'm sure Mark doesn't mind leaving it open for a little bit longer. And hopefully we'll see you all again next week.
Gay?
Yes.
Just one note, is 5-minute speaker Andy